Hey guys, Palsteron here, and today let's talk about everything you can do wrong while playing Explosive Arrow Ballista. And since this build has been kind of in everyone's eye recently, I want to address a few things here that have been thrown around on Reddit, that have been thrown around on Twitter. Now that more content creators have actually tried out the build, I feel like it has died down a little bit, but I still feel like I should address it here at the start. Now, first up, this notion that I'm trying to bait people into playing my build is a little bit nonsensical, not because, oh, I'm such a nice guy or anything, but just in terms of like what content creators do. Your reputation is kind of everything, because there's a lot of intelligent players in this community, and if you make a trash build, people will call you out, and that will then diminish your brand, so to say, and make the notion of doing this full-time even less realistic. So even for people who think that content creators are these bad faith actors, that logic should still kind of make you wary of that. But then you obviously have the problem where some content creators actually put themselves into this mix of like drama, and maybe they shit on your build, when in reality what those content creators specialize in is mostly like crafting or maybe making currency, and they're not really even qualified of giving an opinion without actually playing the build, which I guess I could compare to a Hollywood actor commenting about politics. And secondly, I want to say that out of the people who actually tried out the build, most were pleasantly surprised, and it was usually a good time. Some valid concerns were raised, like playstyle, which for me honestly was kind of a surprise, because that is usually the first thing I think about, and that is like kind of like a given that has nothing to do with just ballistas. That's like, do I like trappers? If I don't like trappers, maybe I shouldn't play a trapper. So I didn't think that it was necessary to actually spell that out, but I will spell it out again. If you do not like ballista playstyle, if you do not like delayed damage, if you do not like damage over time, don't play this build. And also for the few people who did not like this build when they tried it actually out, usually what happened is they sent me their POB. I look at it and there's some glaring mistakes that have actually been that I have explained in my videos, right? But they just did not watch that part. And there I want to make a little bit of a beeline here, because while I understand that you don't have time to watch all of these videos, I get it. If you really care about it, you maybe should, because all I can really provide you with is a build guide that is sort of a recipe. And if you don't follow that recipe fully, right? If you think, oh, maybe he was just being stupid and he forgot this or this. Most of the time I thought about it, and there's a reason for what I did. So if you stray from it, for example, if you put in 3 tablespoons of salt instead of 2, there's probably going to be something wrong. And most likely you wouldn't hold whoever made the recipe accountable for what you changed with that recipe. So if you're somebody who likes to be hipster, who likes to change his recipes, please still watch this video and at least don't change these things. Let's get into it. Number 1, do not use pierce, fork, or chain in this build. And that is simply because the way Explosive Arrow works is only the last enemy that you hit with the projectile actually gets the fuse. So for example, if I have 1 pierce on my quiver or something, a quiver implicit, if I fire with this Explosive Arrow, the first enemy here will not get hit. This guy does not get a fuse. The second one will get the fuse. So this one will take basically no damage. Now, this is not really a problem while mapping, or it is still a problem, but it's not big. But against single targets, that means that it will pierce through the first enemy and will then just apply fuses to nobody. So what will happen is you will do basically no damage to enemies, because your main skill will not function. Don't do this. Number 2, do not break your elemental equilibrium with added fire damage on gear. And that is because if you do any fire damage with your initial hit, not with your explosion, right? That will mean that you will actually remove the fire exposure that elemental equilibrium will give you. So not only does that mean you will not get the exposure with minus 25 resistances, it also means the enemy does not have exposure, so you do not get the minus 25 resistance from Mastermind of Discord either. So you're missing out on minus 50 resistances, which against higher res targets can halve your damage. So just to clarify what I exactly mean by that is, you want to avoid mods that look like this. Adds whatever to whatever fire damage to attack. That is flat fire damage. You do not want that. That is a no, right? Stuff like increased fire damage is totally okay, right? This will not increase your initial hit because you don't have any initial hit fire damage, but your ignite is still fire damage. So this still counts for the part where it matters. So that means stuff like anger is a no-no. If a lot of people were asking why I'm using Wrath, right? I'm a fire skill. Well, it doesn't matter because everything ignites with Shaper of Flames, right? Just don't do anger. There is a reason why I do certain things, right? No Barrage Respite. There's a reason I don't mention it in the video. Don't do it. It's a really good item for most Ignite builds. We cannot use it because it has flat fire damage. Also, no physical to fire conversion. It's the same thing as this stat here. don't get it. And the easiest way to actually check this is a tooltip test, right? And you should do this in your hideout because you have all your auras on. So if you have anger on accidentally, you'll know. If you're in town or something, it will not show the fire damage added by anger. So if you go through here, the only added fire you want to see here is the added fire to the explosion. You see cold damage, you see lightning damage. Those are all okay, right? But there should be no added fire damage, just a little bit of physical damage. As long as you don't convert to fire, completely fine. So if you go through here and you see no added fire damage, you're good. Obviously, you should get into a habit where if you look at items and you see added fire damage, the alarm should be ringing, right? So if you see cold damage, lightning damage, totally okay. Also, I want to mention is that you want to have at least one cold or lightning roll somewhere. Otherwise, your elemental equilibrium also doesn't work because now it applies no element, right? So obviously you want to have like on the storm cloud, you already have lightning damage. Maybe you have like one random roll somewhere. Just keep that in mind. Number 3, do not use low attack speed bows. And I'll take the biggest offender here, which is the Xov's Nurture bow. Everybody's still used to it from playing Burning Arrow, right? It was an awesome bow. We're going to go over it in a second. It's actually garbage for this build. And I'll tell you why. So what I mean by this line here, you're operating PoE, it can't correct your mistakes, right? So you see here attack rate 2.18, for example, on my storm cloud here. Now, a lot of people have told me they played around in PoE, and guess what? Xov's Nurture has more damage. Why the hell am I not using it? Was it budget? But no, the reason I don't use this bow is look at your attack rate once I put it in instead of storm cloud. It goes from 2.18 to 1.46. So you told PoE that you can apply 20 fuses, right? Well, now you put in another bow, and PoE still thinks you're at 20 fuses. You ticked 20 fuses here, when in reality, now you're at 10 fuses because your attack speed sucks, right? PoE doesn't know that. It still tells you the damage at 20, but in reality, you cannot use it anymore. So be careful of that. Number 2, why this bow is also bad is because it has physical damage converted to fire, which will also break your elemental equilibrium. So I plead with you, don't use this bow. In fact, I'm not exaggerating when I say a white short bow from an Act 1 vendor is better than Xov's Nurture in this build. That is how bad it is. And in general, I just want to harp on this point. Don't use bows that have too low attack speed. Really think about your attack speed rolls on your thicket bows or like short bows or whatever you're using, right? You can use Lionized Glare, for example. I go over this in the video as well, but Lionized Glare has pretty decent attack speed, right? It can go up to, I think, like 1.74, right? It means you you don't have to get accuracy, right? Stuff like that. Just be mindful of that. Number 4, Ancestral Bond mistakes. Now, I put a few things in here because I get asked a lot why I'm using Combustion with this, why I'm using Flame Surge with this, why I'm using Archnemesis brand, whatever, right? So let's go through it. Number 1, the reason I use Lightning Spire Trap or any trap to trigger Combustion is that a skill has to deal any amount of damage to actually ignite. So that means that with Ancestral Bond, I actually don't deal any damage myself. So I have to find other ways to damage the enemy to actually apply and ignite. And traps do exactly that for you because traps are not you, right? So they deal separate damage so they can still ignite. Number 2, Flame Surge's damage over time, the burning ground that it leaves behind, is secondary damage. So it still works even if you have Ancestral Bond. And even better than that, with Ancestral Bond, the initial hit is not secondary damage, right? So Flame Surge does a hit and then it procs a burning ground. And the hit doesn't do any damage. So it also, even though it's fire, doesn't screw up our elemental equilibrium. And number 3, a common misconception as well, damage over time does not proc elemental equilibrium. Elemental equilibrium needs a hit to happen. So if, for example, you flame dash through an enemy, there is no hit there, the enemy will just go over the burning ground and it will take damage over time. It will never get hit. Same with Flame Surge damage over time or anything like that. So don't worry about those. Number 5, a suggestion that I've gotten a lot, and that is Barrage Support. Don't do it. It's hot garbage. So the main reasons Ballista are used for this Explosive Arrow build is that you don't have to do weird things like Quill Rain. You don't have to do weird things like Barrage Support because these things have huge less multiplier. Quill Rain has like 30% less damage. Barrage Support has 62% less damage. That's like less than half of your damage, and you lose a support gem. So overall, that's probably like 1/3 of the damage. So what you're basically doing is, for a skill that has a maximum of 20 fuses, you're trying to apply like 30 or 40 And by doing that, you're using Barrage Support, and you're cutting your damage by less than half. And number 6 is a little bit of a less egregious example, and that is simply that you don't need additional projectiles. And I understand where this notion comes from, right? Like Rain of Splinters, GMP, I get it. A lot of the projectile skills, they only clear well if you have a lot of arrows. And don't get me wrong, that is nice to have endgame, but there is no reason to invest your first, I don't know, 50 chaos or whatever into a Rain of Splinters, because the skill has an inbuilt AoE, it has ignite proliferation, so even if you don't have it, you're still going to clear very well. So Rain of Splinters is a quality of life improvement that is only really, you should only really think about it if you already have a really strong character. Definitely not, don't think about this at Leaguestart, maybe later, because it also decreases your damage, right? Also, don't use GMP, it still is a socket. Now, I guess the only exception would be if you really like swapping out gems. I don't know why you would do that. Once you'll play the build, you'll know what I mean. Ignite Prolif is more than enough to carry the clear. Now, that being said, that doesn't mean that you can't do it. As I said, at late game, once you have good gear, definitely think about acquiring at least +2 additional projectiles. Now, do note that you do not want just +1 projectile, because that would mean that the ballista kind of fires out in a fork, if that makes sense. So, yeah, if you want additional projectiles, you want at least 2. You want uneven numbers. And number 7, I just want to put this in here real quick as well, is a lot of people have asked about recovery. Does this build have a problem with recovery? Number 1, I don't really think it's that big of an issue. Toxic Rain didn't really have good recovery, and it was like the meta build for like several leagues, but I will still give you some options here. Number 1 is using a second life flask, and this is no meme. I know a lot of people are still living in 3.14 and they think life flasks are bad or something, but I can assure you that life flasks are a valid source of recovery, as a lot of people will tell you. And the thing that you can do is also you can go Profane Chemistry and Flask Mastery, and that is basically this wheel here that I allocated in my build guide. Together with the Flask Mastery, you gain 2 life charges every 3 seconds. As well as that, there is also the Minor Pantheon that is Soul of Rislava. Life Flasks gain 3 charges every 3 seconds if you haven't used a Life Flask recently. So these all stack together to basically give you a crazy amount of Life Flask sustain. And that is also possible because the only mandatory flasks in the build are a Quicksilver, a Jade, and a Granite Flask, leaving you with 1 life flask that you definitely want, and then another flex slot, which you can sub in a second life flask. Also, and I just want to throw that in here because I just thought about it. This is something I do with Cyrus a lot, right? At Leaguestart, is if you think about how these pinnacle bosses work, right? A lot of the time you don't get any flash charges back, or not enough for stuff like Jade Flask or Granite Flask to really matter. All these like passive buffs don't really, they're not up all the time. So what you want is reactive flask. You still want your Quicksilver flask to get you out of weird situations, right? But you can literally go for 4 life flasks and they all gain these charges per second, basically making you a recovery machine. Then there's also the 3% life regen from a flask craft. So you can actually unveil this. It is a veiled craft that you can drop from Katarina, or you can just pay a crafter to get this on your flask, right? What you can also do is something like this mastery here. You can go for regenerate 2% of life per second while moving, which is actually something I do in the endgame version. These come together nicely. As well as that, you can also take this 2-pointer here, get another % regen here. We also get 1.6 regen here. And at the end, I will also note that you can always try to get vitality in your build. But that is basically the gist of it. These are the biggest mistakes that you can make. If you watch out for those, I don't think much can happen to you at Leaguestart. You're going to be fine. If you, once again, if you don't like the playstyle, just don't play it. That is the case with every single build out there. It doesn't matter how good a build is. If you hate your time, you're going to play less, you're going to be on Reddit, you're going to complain instead of farming, instead of progressing, having fun, right? So definitely always choose a build that you actually like. But that's it for the video. If you liked it, give it a thumbs up. And if you haven't already, subscribe. As always, a huge shout out to my Twitch subscribers and my Patreons. I couldn't do this without you. Thank you so much for the support. But yeah, that's basically all I have to say about this build. Of course, there's some things that you can do wrong, right? People are talking about the next build disaster or whatever. Honestly, if I had the choice of making cookie cutter builds that have like no interesting mechanics where you can do nothing wrong, I would probably just rather quit the game, honestly, because that is what I love about PoE in general. So yeah, if you want to play one of those builds, you definitely can. If you feel like this is too much to think about, there is so many other good builds out there. don't get too much into the hype. This build has been hyped out of proportions already, right? It's a really, really good build, but some people praise it into oblivion. It always happens. I can't really do anything about it. But yeah, with that being said, since I still don't have a slogan, see you next time.